Good morning, everyone. It's been a minute since I gave a full garden update, and since we're already entering into the second full week of August, I thought now would be a good time. For those of you who are new to the channel, I am gardening in Ohio in Zone 6A. I wanted to welcome you and thank you for coming to visit my garden. I love having the opportunity to share all of this with you. So let's take a look. Today, I thought we would start outside the garden fence with the tomatoes. This year, I am growing multiple indigo type tomatoes because I wanted to see which ones had the best color and the best flavor. So far, the front runner by far is Midnight Snacks, but I always like to give tomatoes some time into the season before I make a final decision because I have noticed that the flavor and the quality changes so much depending on rainfall and temperatures and the alignment of the planets. I don't know what does it, but you can taste a tomato at the beginning of August and they can taste completely different at the end of August. So let me show you some of these varieties. My first indigo variety is Blueberries, and this plant has been nice and healthy so far this season. I've got a good crop load of relatively small cherry-sized fruit. You can see that as these ripen, they lose most of that indigo coloration. There's a little left in places where they have some sun exposure, but in areas where the fruit are shaded, they turn basically completely red. This one has a decent flavor, but I'm not blown away yet. My next variety is Helsing Junction Blue. This plant is not quite as vigorous, but it does have a larger fruit size. These tomatoes are also keeping a lot more of that indigo coloration as they ripen. And the fruit so far this season have a good texture and nice acidity, but are lacking a little bit in depth of flavor for my preference. Next is Dancing with Smurfs. You have to love some of the names of these tomato varieties. They definitely get creative. This one is not retaining as much of that indigo coloration, again, similar to the Blueberries when it ripens. Kind of a medium-sized cherry. These are very, very juicy and a little bit bland in flavor. And this one has shown the most foliar disease so far this season of any of the indigo varieties I'm growing. In between here, I've got some wonderful Carmencita castor beans. This beauty is Indigo Apple, and this one is a larger fruited variety with a less vigorous plant. And I'm actually really liking this plant habit. It's very easily manageable, nice for training on these cucumber trellises. And for being a relatively small plant, it has a really nice fruit set. And man, are these fruit gorgeous. Just look at this cluster and look at that color. Now, I've not had a chance to taste these yet, so I can't speak to the flavor, but I'm hoping that they are delicious. Now, these last two are not indigo varieties, and you may notice that this plant looks a little stunted in comparison to the rest. That is because just a few days after transplanting, a deer nibbled this thing off basically to the ground. I left it go in hopes that it would sprout back. It did. And the plant is looking great and has a good fruit load on it now. And I've got one tomato just starting to color up. So hopefully I will be picking off of this one soon. This is one called Brandywise. It's a Brandywine type with septoria leaf spot resistance. And this crazy jungle of a plant, reaching at least 8 feet tall. is a new variety called Red Desire. And you can see it has this really cool kind of dark brick red and green striping to the fruit. It's got a nice firm texture and a really interesting, rich, savory, sweet flavor. And if we peek around the corner here from the tomatoes, I've got what is turning into a compost pile. I'm keeping my grass clippings here for use for mulch later in the garden. And then my hugel bed looks just kind of a bit like a jungle. You can see the cowpea cover crop. It's kind of taking over. I've got random. Here's one of my mystery squashes that have put on a gourd-like fruit. I've got tomatoes growing in there. Some volunteer borage here. A little bit of everything in there. My Concord seedless grapes. Still waiting for some color on those. Elderberries are starting to ripen, which is always fun. It's also always fun to try to keep the birds off of these. So this is the north side or the front end of the garden, and there are some exciting things going on through here as well. First, I've got my little container strawberry planting that I did this spring, and these are Charlotte strawberries that I planted in here. You can see we're just starting to get some fruit. This is an ever-bearing variety, so rather than pick off all the blooms, I picked off the blooms until the start of August and then allowed them to start fruiting. With a June-bearing variety, you would pick off all the blooms the first year of planting, just to allow the plants to really get an established root system. But this is the fun of an ever-bearing plant. I'm now going to end up with strawberries in August rather than just strawberries at the beginning of the season. Over here are my razzmatazz grapes in hanging baskets. These guys have been in these baskets for, I think I'm going on 4 or 5 years. I think 4. They desperately need transplanted. They are looking pretty rough, but they're still putting on a decent crop load. And the flavor and texture of this one are just unbeatable. Now they are teeny tiny grapes, but for snacking and for kids, this is a family favorite by far. Row of big top marigolds, true to their name. A pretty good flower size on a compact plant. And I've got sunflowers and morning glories. I'm hoping to put a more perennial border in here, specifically for attracting pollinators. And that will probably be done next year. These lovely purple zinnias. More morning glories. These are chocolate runner beans, which these were planted pretty early and I'm letting them go to seed, so the flowers are almost all spent on these. This is a fun one. This is Basket of Fire. It's a hot pepper bred for containers and for these lovely colors that the fruit change as they ripen. And I'm super excited. I have some figs on here. I know this is not exciting for you folks further south where figs are relatively easy to grow. I am just a smidge too far north for figs to be hardy. So I've kept this guy in my greenhouse for several winters. I bring them out in the summer, and this is the first year I've had figs on here, and I apologize, I can't remember for sure what this one is. I'm thinking it's brown turkey, but I'm not for certain. These are my Jerusalem artichoke, and they are just kind of going nuts right now. This is a great perennial food crop, but do not plant it anywhere where you might eventually want to get rid of it, because it is very hard to get rid of. It is very persistent. But the flip side of that is that it's very easy to grow. This produces a starchy tuber that can be harvested in the fall, which is very tasty roasted with herbs and garlic, and a very good source of inulin, which is a type of fiber that's very beneficial to your gut microbiome. We're here inside the garden fence now, and I wanted to show you first some of the beautiful flowers that are blooming right now. I like to mix in a lot of annual flowers, mainly for the pollinators and beneficial insects, but also just to enjoy their beauty. And there is quite a lot of colorful blooming going on right now. Starting up front here, I've got my calendula. Now these aren't the prettiest right now, but I do like to let these go to seed and then drop these seed because they will readily self-sow, and these will actually sprout up and grow in time for another flush of blooms this fall. This is Jolt Dianthus. It's the purple variation, and the color on this has just been phenomenal this year. One of my all-time favorites here, this is the Queenie Zinnia series, and specifically this is Queenie Lime Orange. I love this color. We're getting some interesting flower formations here too, but these things just start out this beautiful kind of orange sherbet color, and as they mature, they get a deeper, darker salmon and this lovely kind of ombre effect on these blooms is really neat. This is Daisy Wheel Lemon Marigold. First year trying this. It's an interesting variation on a marigold bloom. More little, these are Gurney's Hedge sunflowers. I kind of have them everywhere, but I love this one because it's a multi-branch sunflower, so you get many, many blooms on one plant. Holy cow, look at all the bees going to town there. And these stay kind of in the range of about 3 feet tall, very stocky and compact. Calendula everywhere. A lot of this is volunteer. Nasturtiums. Again, I think all of the nasturtiums back here were volunteers. More volunteer bachelor buttons. These are more of the Queenie zinnias, but I've got the Queenie Lime Rose, Queenie Lime, and the Queenie Lime Orange all mixed together in here. You can see there's just the straight lime. And this is one of my absolute favorites. This is Nigella Miss Jekyll. Common name is Love in a Mist because of this really delicate, airy foliage. I'm fascinated by these little blooms. I think they're so pretty. Got some celosia back there. And Golden Sunshine Runner Bean, which is really neat because it's got those vibrant chartreuse leaves with the bright corally red blooms. Some volunteer sulfur cosmos. More of the Gurney's Hedge sunflowers, but these guys were planted earlier and they're starting to spend out here. More of the purple zinnias. And these little marigolds here are the Happy Mix marigolds. More Jolt Dianthus, but this is the cherry color. Again, this color, when you come out here at dusk, it just glows. Here are the Xochi marigolds. These things just have bloomed and bloomed and bloomed and bloomed. A very, very tall marigold. These are at least 5 feet tall. And a really nice contrast between those dusty blue-green leaves and that vibrant golden orange color. Tucked down here, I've got another of my favorites. These are Signet marigolds. And they have this really wonderful grapefruity citrus scent. More salvia and Happy Mix marigolds. This is my glass gem corn. I've not grown this variety in containers before. I've done it in ground. So I've got 6 plants each in 20-gallon grow tub containers. And for reference, I am 5'8" or 5'9" depending on the day. And these babies are way up there. I planted these late and they are just starting now to tassel. So I'm hoping I've got enough time in the season to actually get some ears, because this is a really beautiful variety. I will be sure to share an update with you on this one later in the season. So this tent in the middle of my garden is another experiment this year. The cucurbit pest kind of threw me for a loop. Last year I had hardly any pressure from cucumber beetles, squash vine borers, or squash bugs, and this year they more than made up for it. I have already pulled every cucumber that I planted in May because they died from bacterial wilt, which is spread by cucumber beetles. I've pulled 90% of my pumpkins because of squash vine borer infestations, and I'm down to my last few summer squash. I was really not ready to give up on my cucumbers this early in the season. So this is the method I am trying this year. This was a late planted parthenocarpic cucumber variety. Parthenocarpic just means that it does not need pollination by insects to set fruit. And the advantage to this is that I can keep this netting on the cucumbers the entire season. I don't have to take the netting off to allow pollination to happen in order to get a fruit set. So my plan is to let these cucumbers grow under here until harvest, at which time I will get under this netting and pick. And in theory, this should prevent any of those pests that I mentioned earlier from being able to access these plants. Now, I will definitely provide an update when this starts fruiting so you can see if this works the way I think it should work or not. But the thing to keep in mind if you want to try something similar is that you do want to move your planting. So you don't want to do this in the same spot that you planted cucumbers or squash or pumpkins last year and had those insect pests. And that is because depending on the pest and the life cycle, some of them will be present in the soil. And if you plant there the following year and put netting over your plants, as you can imagine, all you're doing is trapping the pests in with your plants, which is not what you want to do. On my cattle panel archway this year, I've got another loofah gourd planted. I did one last year for the first time, and honestly, we'll probably grow it every year just for ornamental value, if nothing else. I love the plant, I love the yellow blooms, and the loofah sponges are an added bonus. On the other side here, I've got a combination of runner beans and pole beans. And this runner bean is a new one I'm trying this year. I'm really loving it so far. This is a variety called Chocolate. And you can see it has these really beautiful bicolor blooms, which the hummingbirds love. And the bean pods themselves are very tasty, very rich and sweet. I actually like the flavor better than a traditional snap bean. Tomatillos are starting to ripen up. Now, I am a big fan of tomatillos. There's some times that I think that I actually might like them better than tomatoes. Don't tell the tomatoes. But there is something about that bright citrusy flavor that these things have that is really refreshing in the summertime. I love these for making salsa verde as well as like a green enchilada sauce. The back of the garden is also just kind of a mix of everything. A lot of this was devoted to spring crops, so I'm kind of at an in-between right now where the spring crops have already come out. In a lot of spots I just have cover crop planted, and I'll be putting fall crops in there later. So you will see some blank spots back here. Brussels sprouts up front here are doing pretty well. The trick for me with these is always keeping the cabbage worms off. I kept these covered until they were just too big for my hoops. And since I've taken the covers off, I've just been doing a regular application of a BT spray. And BT is an organically approved spray. It is a bacteria, Bacillus thunbergiensis. I always mess that up. But it is a targeted product, so it only affects members of the Lepidoptera family, which are caterpillars. So when I'm spraying it on brassicas like Brussels sprouts, it is really only affecting the cabbage worms. Now, a word of warning, it will kill all caterpillars, so even the good ones like swallowtail or monarchs. But the key here is to make sure that you're not spraying it on any plants that might be hosting those types of caterpillars. Back here, I've got just a small planting of okra. You'll see at my mom and dad's, we have a much larger planting. It's more okra than we'll ever be able to use. So if anybody wants some okra, I've got the hookup. Now I know that okra is one of those polarizing garden vegetables where it seems like you either love it or you hate it, but I'm gonna put a little plug in for okra. I know it's traditionally thought of as more of a southern plant, but I have found that here in Ohio, this plant is a rock star. So there are not a lot of pests that bother it, it doesn't get disease, it puts up with heat, humidity, drought, clay soil. This is actually, I'm thinking of using it as a clay busting plant because the root systems on these plants are amazing and they will just burrow straight through pretty much solid clay, I'm convinced. They're really impressive. Now the key is, if you're new to growing okra, don't pick your okra like this. You really want to go for the young, tender pods. I try to pick them at 4 inches or less. It's going to depend a little on the variety. There are some varieties that stay tender longer than others. But as they get larger, they get really tough and woody and basically inedible. I personally think these make a really tasty snack, just raw out of the garden. I'm probably in the minority in that opinion, but even if you don't like them raw, fried okra is pretty hard to beat. Back here is buckwheat that needs chopped down. This is one of the spaces I mentioned where I'm just filling in. I had fennel back here and it all came out. So I planted buckwheat here. Garlic and onions came out, and I've got cowpea cover crop planted in many of these areas. This is a really fun plant. I talked about this a little bit last year on one of my garden update tours, but this is an herb called spilanthes, and it has about 1 million different nicknames. You'll see it referred to as toothache plant, buzz button, electric daisy, and it's gotten some popularity in recent years because some crafty bartenders figured out that you could serve this with a mixed drink, and it created a really interesting drinking experience. So the unique thing about spilanthes is that it contains a compound which has a mouth tingling, numbing sensation. And when you chew up these little buds, you get a feeling in your mouth. The only thing that I can think to compare it to is like eating Pop Rocks when you were a kid. It's not quite like that, but I don't know of anything else that has that feeling. But it's actually a very, very useful medicinal herb in addition to just this novel quality. And I love this unique look, and it's incredibly easy to grow. It self-seeds, takes no care, no fertilizer, no nothing. So this is one I've really enjoyed having in the garden. And over here is a zucchini, a poor victim to the squash vine borer. Now you can see there the telltale damage of the squash vine borer. I should have gotten in here earlier and picked that little larva out and squished him. I was not on top of it. But this is what they do, and this is what kills the plant. So you can see that's just like a soft, gooey mess. Now, a lot of folks will see these are squash bug nymphs. They'll see these, oh, and here's an adult. They'll see these on their plants and think that they have killed them. They will do a lot of damage, and a heavy enough infestation can kill a plant, but more often than not, for me, it's actually the squash vine borer that has done the ultimate damage. Back here is a planting of jalapenos. I love hot peppers, not just for eating, but because they are one of those few plants that here in my area are almost foolproof. There's not too many pests that bother them. They don't succumb to diseases. They are just typically healthy and happy and productive the entire season here. So I really enjoy growing them for that reason. And this particular jalapeno is one that I really, really like. This is a variety called Perfect Rings. And the unique thing about this variety is this really long fruit, which stays pretty thick all the way almost to the end. So this, true to its name, makes perfect rings. So I do a lot of pickled jalapeno rings that I preserve for the winter, and this variety is just superb for that usage. Now you'll see a lot of these fruit have what is called checking on them. That does not affect the quality. This just happens as the jalapenos get older. So I was not on top of picking these right away. They sat out here on the plant for a long time and they start to develop that checking. There are some jalapenos that are more prone to this than others, but again, these are totally usable, nothing wrong with those fruit. And back here is a sad reminder of the cucumbers that were. I had several really beautiful, really productive pickling cucumber and spaghetti squash plants back here that all got taken down by bacterial wilt. So I had to strip these all out of here about a week and a half ago. It's depressing and it happens to the best of us, but this will help me plan better for next year. Back here I've got my celery. This is a variety called Kelvin, which I have really liked so far this year. And what I like about it is it produces these nice fat stalks. I've grown celery in the past that the stalks have just been scrawny and fibrous and not all that great. This has a really rich celery flavor. It's not too fibrous and it's very productive. All through here, I've got a planting of edamame. This is a vegetable that for some reason is a big favorite of my oldest child, so I try to grow it every year. And it's another crop that's really, really easy to grow in my area. I have one last indigo variety inside the garden here. The other one, Midnight Snacks, which I mentioned is my favorite so far, is actually at my parents', which I will show you guys later. This one is Indigo Rose, a bit more of a compact, shorter plant, but a very, very heavy crop load on this one. A little bit larger fruit size, especially on the primary fruit, though some of the secondary fruit up near the top is quite a bit smaller. This one definitely keeps more of its indigo coloration. You can see that beautiful indigo blush on this fruit. Very juicy, has a good savory start, but is kind of flat towards the finish. So I'm hoping maybe these improve as the season goes on. Here I've got more of your traditional round red tomatoes. If you recall from the last video, I was trialing several different varieties to find a replacement for Early Girl, which is a well-known older variety which is being phased out. And here, Early Doll definitely seems to be the most similar, but I did find two Hungarian varieties, Marienka and Darinka, which were significantly earlier than Early Girl and have a very, very compact determinate plant habit, which is nice for growing in these tomato cages. You can see here's an Early Doll. This is the Early Doll plant, and here's an Early Girl. And they are virtually identical, and the taste is very similar as well. In this spot, I just recently dug my purple Viking potatoes, so I've got buckwheat planted in here as a quick growing cover crop. And I promised to show you an update of my purple Viking potato harvest. And spoiler alert, it's still my favorite potato of all time. It is always productive, always easy to grow, has not failed me yet. So check out the harvest. And our chickens are much bigger now. These guys are getting ready to be moved out of here in the next couple weeks. And as I mentioned in my last garden video, the plan is for this to be planted in cover crop, probably rye this fall, in preparation for planting in garden material next spring. They have done an excellent job of working up the ground, fertilizing, getting rid of weeds. And as an added bonus, they are a great method of disposal for those giant summer squash and zucchini that I don't pick in time, as well as a lot of other produce. You can see this guy over here eating some old kohlrabi. And the last stop is the greenhouse, just because I wanted to remind everyone that it is time to plant fall brassicas if you are in a similar growing area as me. So I've got a lot of brassicas, cauliflower, broccoli, kohlrabi, kale, cabbage. I've got my long season greens like endive and chard, and I've got some fennel in here all hardening off, and my goal is to transplant these about another week, week and a half.